Welcome to the Soulstem podcast, where we explore healing at the intersection of mind, body, and spirit. I'm Topher Scott. I'm a licensed professional counselor associate in the state of Texas, supervised by Leslie Smith, LPCS.
And I'm Dr. Kenny Middlestat, a functional medicine practitioner and acupuncturist trained in systems-based root cause care in Texas, California, and Florida. On this show, we go beyond the quick fixes and into deeper layers of healing through the lenses of counseling, mental health, and functional medicine.
We are here for the seekers, for those of you who have felt dismissed, pathologized, or left wondering if the system missed the point entirely.
And if you've ever left an appointment thinking they didn't really hear me, or I still don't understand why I feel this way, you're not alone.
And today we're talking about something that's touched almost everyone at some point: burnout. Not just I'm tired burnout, but the deeper kind that reshapes how we live, work, and even how we see ourselves.
So let's jump right into this one. Topher, how do we start by defining burnout?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways, but I just kind of want to be clear that burnout is not just stress. Stress is a natural part of life. And in some cases, stress can be motivating, but burnout is a different thing. It's a collapse of the system. Oftentimes, chronic stress is a part of that. It's the pathway towards burnout. But really, when we think about burnout, it's about emotional exhaustion, physical exhaustion, depersonalization, and oftentimes a deeper loss of meaning. And I think it's also not an individual problem. One of the reasons I suspect that we see this happening in such a widespread way, in such an epidemic way in our country, is because it's systemic. So in other words, it's not a personal failing. It's an issue that needs to be addressed systemically.
I can't wait to dive into that systemic portion. And in the functional medicine space, I see burnout show up with my patients. It can start with hormone dysregulation, gut issues, issues with sleep, and chronic inflammation throughout the whole body, because the systems affected by burnout and chronic stress are the ones that go offline. And the way I see it presented is when patients come in and they say something along the lines of, I have never felt well since this moment in time. We really trace back their history to see what was going on leading up to and at that specific point in time in their lives. Oftentimes we'll see these themes, the systemic pressures, the personal and internalized pressures that are just so prevalent and part of our society.
Absolutely. That's huge. Looking for those markers, those early indicators. And for many people, the antecedents that pave the path towards burnout begin very early in life. For many of us, in childhood. And I'm not just talking about trauma. I'm talking about mindset and mantras and ways of thinking, the beliefs that we hold. Most importantly, I think the beliefs that we're taught, because we come into this world really not having that program or this specific rigid mindset around work. And we're taught many different things and ideas about work and what it means to be productive, what it means to be a functional person. Oftentimes, there are these manufactured emotions and experiences that get folded in, like guilt and shame and judgment, that also become hidden drivers that take over, and we're not always consciously aware of it. And I do think burnout is something that is such a challenge. It's not something you can just positively think your way out of. There is more work to it than that.
I totally agree. And when we talk about some of the root causes, I see patterns of mismatch between our biological capacity and the environmental demands that are placed on us. And like you're saying, a lot of these are placed on us by society, by family, by internal systems, the negative self-talk or drivers for success that are sometimes so far outside of ourselves and maybe outside of our physiological capacity. People push through sleep for meeting deadlines or self-care. I think there's this paradise idea of what self-care really looks like, but it's really something that should be designed and built into our everyday lives. We are designed to have more rhythm built into our everyday experiences, connection, life purpose, movement. But modern life, modern demands, capitalist society, they push us toward a constant state of productivity and sometimes disconnection from those deeper needs in terms of filling your cup. And I hear this all the time, patients coming in and saying, I feel like I'm pouring from an empty cup, whether that's with family or work or all these other internalized pressures that we place on ourselves, both personally and systemically.
Absolutely. I think you touched on something that's really central to burnout, which is that we are living in conditions that just aren't sustainable. They aren't in alignment with how our bodies are designed to operate. When we look at the system we're living in, we have to think about where this came from. When we think about capitalism existing within colonialism and its design to capitalize on labor, capitalize on energy, the mantra that time is money, and so we're trying to harvest as much of it as we can, squeeze every drop. These are ideas and mantras that come from capitalism and colonialism, not from ancestral wisdom, not from the intuitive inner knowing. It's totally out of alignment. And that's the real crux of the issue here. And we see those as red flags pop up for us: fatigue, sleep disturbances, irritability, loss of focus, distractibility, loss of purpose, apathy. For some of us, it creeps up as anxiety, terrified to go into the workplace, afraid to go into that meeting, saying things like, if I don't get this done, my boss is going to kill me. Think about when we say those things, does our mind and body know the difference between thought and reality? Not really. So it's taking those cues seriously. And the result is that we're disconnected from joy. We dread work. We don't equate it necessarily with purpose and pleasure and creativity, which is an important reframe. When we're in alignment, work becomes creativity. It becomes a channel. And we also know how to channel our energy into other domains of life that strengthen us and support us so that we can continue to pour into our purpose, into our work. But we recognize the work channel is one spoke on the wheel of life. It's not the whole picture. And for so many of us, we're trained to point our flashlight in just one direction. A big part of this comes back to us looking at how we frame our day and how we prioritize different experiences in our life. Are we focusing on a broad set of wellness and life priorities that feed our souls? Or are we disproportionately amplifying one experience?
I see this too. And I think one of the red flags that walks into my practice that I'm overly sensitive to now is how desensitized we have become to what is considered a stressor. I think we have a culture around just powering through and getting the job done at the expense, again, of our physiological health, mental well-being. Really, all the domains of health and wellness can be affected by these kinds of pressures. We have a really interesting way of thinking about stress in our culture as an admittance of weakness in a way. And that's something that I really see in patients who just sometimes can't put the right words to what they're feeling because they've desensitized themselves from all the sources of stress that really are playing out in their lives. I always go back to this idea of hidden stressors. We're not just talking about perceived emotional stress alone, but also things like the hidden inflammatory stressors, the standard American diet and gut stressors, hidden infections, financial stressors, internal negative self-dialogue stressors. That plays directly into our stress physiology. Stress physiology really affects almost every system of our body, from your gut to your hormones, thyroid, the skin. Everything is a manifestation of our inputs and outputs in terms of, are we replenishing our cups or pouring from that proverbial empty cup?
Absolutely. And stress physiology is huge. It's very central to my approach to counseling, too. One of the foundational things that I like to teach to my clients and to people who attend my meditation classes as well is nervous system regulation. Activities like breath work, grounding, vagus nerve stimulation, orienting, and resourcing. Very helpful, but it's not the whole story. For me, in this particular subject matter, when we're talking about burnout, we have to go even deeper. There's something that happens before that, and it's going back to the way we think about work And the things that we tell ourselves, as you pointed out, those internal safety cues and internal messages, creating safety for ourselves, for many of us, will look like evaluating those thoughts. I'll just speak for myself here in this moment. I grew up in a home where the mantra was, if you're not working or being productive, you're lazy. This is very black and white. It suggests that during every waking hour and every waking moment, you really need to be doing something productive in order to have self-worth. That is very much a currency sort of mindset around this issue, and that's part of the problem. It comes back to underneath that is time is money. Your time is very valuable, but it does not always have to be spent being a player in the capitalistic system. It also means that for every investment into your productivity and creativity, you can also make an equal investment into recharging yourself, resting, taking care of yourself, engaging in community and family, friendships, nutrition, lifestyle activities that support your wellness. These are all very important investments, energy investments that help to create protective factors.
I appreciate that so much. I was having a conversation with you offline about what is the purpose of the 9-to-5 culture that we have built and designed, and at what expense does that productivity come to our health as a society? This cumulative load really baked into the culture of stress on our bodies. It has a very physiological effect. I would argue, perhaps boldly, that most of the chronic disease burden that we see in our society is rooted in a nervous system that has been cooking in chronic stress really since birth. It sets the stage for insidious types of conditions to set in, anything from chronic heart disease to blood sugar dysregulation and diabetes are rooted in stress physiology as well because of the role that cortisol plays in blood sugar balance and inflammation control throughout the entire body. We do have to ask ourselves, when we talk about this from a public health perspective, we can reframe the burden of stress that's baked into our culture. What is this doing to serve our society and our quality of life at large? We obviously have some of the worst health outcomes, and I don't doubt that that is in part because of the implications of the chronic hustle culture and the chronic stress that we are up against every day. You have to fight upstream in order to be different and go against the grain in the society, but it also comes with its different opportunities for freedoms from these stressors that are just baked into quote unquote normal life.
Absolutely. There's a systems level piece in all of this, and that is beyond what we're taught in childhood by our families oftentimes. There's also what happens in the school systems as well. School systems creating a game out of achievement, essentially. Most of us end up having to choose our careers around the age of 14 to 18. We're choosing a trajectory, and there's a lot of pressure around it because you're going to go to college, right? And the education is probably going to cost a lot. And there's a lot riding on it at this very, very delicate time when you're just barely developing your identity. A lot of us get ushered into paths that may not be a perfect fit for us. And that's another issue. And we get out into the workplace. We experience it as a culture that tends to create hustle and urgency. When we're operating in that urgent mindset, in that urgent place, again, how is it affecting the nervous system and the stress physiology? If we're experiencing urgency on a day-to-day basis, how it's sending signals across our nervous system, disrupting the gut which is responsible for producing neurotransmitters and creating hormonal balance. This is how it happens. And the chronicity of that situation eventually leads to the burnout, the loss of connection. For many of us, when this happens, we either get into a deep rut with it and we really don't know what to do, or if we're well positioned, we can take the moment to pivot and find alignment.
That's big. I mean, no doubt the systemic pressures and barriers are great and vast. What are some of the ways you think that we can start to take little actions to be counterculture in this way, or to protect ourselves in the process. Do you have tools that you like to start your clients with?
Absolutely. I think the first one that I'd prioritize is rest. Rest is so foundational for everything, for our physical well-being, our mental well-being, to pour into the cup of society in any meaningful way. We really have to attend to ourselves, and it starts with rest. If you don't sleep well, make that your number one priority. Whether that's working with a counselor, a functional medicine provider, or another holistic wellness provider, attending to your sleep hygiene, studying that subject, learning what is good sleep hygiene and how do we create it. Boundaries as well. By this, I mean setting limits, knowing that these are my productive hours. I'm going to end things at a certain time and honor that. And I'm not going to let other people bait me into breaking my boundaries. If I get that message after 6 o'clock, I have to remember what's the worst that's going to happen. If I don't attend to this tonight and I roll it over to tomorrow, what catastrophe is really going to happen? And if you're working in an environment that lives in crisis mode on a regular basis, where everything is so time sensitive and delicate, examine that. Ask yourself if that's really the frequency where you want to be on a regular basis. Because if you can't change that about the work environment, that's not where your locus of control is. Your locus of control in that moment is to ask yourself if this environment is aligned with me, and if it's not, then how do I find my way into an environment that honors wellness and prioritizes that for its work culture?
I would mirror that completely. Boundaries in particular are a subject that is difficult to exercise in our society and in this culture, but one of the most profound things that you can start with. Another tool I like to use is to utilize technology to our advantage. One of my favorite things to rely on is heart rate variability to give some objective data to how your nervous system is handling stress resilience and impacting your overall body burden. That's built into a lot of devices these days. So I think that's a really good place to land. Just remembering that burnout is not a personal failure. It's more of a signal that something bigger needs to shift. We need to return that locus of control to ourselves in some way.
Absolutely. Autonomy is really central in all of this. When people have more autonomy in their schedules, in their lives, in their wellness, more choice, that's where we see magic really happen. And it doesn't mean that they're any less productive. In fact, I would argue that the data shows the opposite, that people who are more empowered, who experience more wellness and more balance, are capable of moving mountains. I'm just going to put a period on that.
That's beautiful. Just trying to create more lives that are worth living. On that note, thank you all for being with us in this episode. If this resonated, share it with someone you care about deeply, and let's keep the conversation going.
And until next time, stay rooted, stay connected, and remember your wellness matters more than your productivity.
For a fresh dose of science and soul, be sure to follow and subscribe.
Find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or Spotify. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next time.